Professor Koen Vossen, thank you very much for joining our interview series. Let me start right away with the first question. The recent Dutch election produced a dramatic reversal for the PVV, whose
Yeah.
coalition participation ended in collapse, while D66 surged to the top of the polls. To what extent should we interpret this outcome as evidence of a structural electoral realignment favoring centrist pro-EU forces, or as a temporary calibration following the PVV's troubled spell in government? In other words,
Yes.
are we witnessing a durable shift in voter preferences or merely the electoral consequences of a perceived misgovernance?
Yeah, I think both. Interpreting Dutch election results is always tricky because we are a country of minorities. So we have more minorities. So there are always more stories than one story in an election result. What you see is last election that there was among a part of the electorate a longing for more stability, for a more stable coalition, fed up with the old polarization and a longing for more centrist politics. Absolutely. So that was absolutely there. At the same time, you have seen also in the Netherlands, one could say the border between the radical right and the center right somehow has been blurred, especially the conservative liberal VVD, the party once led by Mark Rutte, now led by Dylan Jezus, has gone very much to the right and wanted to have absolutely a center-right coalition without Wilders' party. And so she hoped there would be enough votes for a center-right coalition. So one could also interpret the result as some support for this center-right coalition. One could also interpret it as support for a more centrist coalition. At the same time, Wilders' party also still had like I think 18% or 17% of the vote. So he lost some votes, but still he is the second party in the Netherlands. So there are different stories here.
Right. Despite near parity in seat totals, Geert Wilders appears politically isolated, as most mainstream parties again refuse coalition cooperation. Does this effective cordon sanitaire signal the enduring resilience of Dutch party system norms against radical right institutionalization, or
Yeah.
does the continued aggregate strength of the far-right parties, including FVD or JA21, indicate a deeper long-term transformation in the ideological landscape that may eventually erode such exclusionary practices?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you could say that the radical right maintained its position with about 30% of the vote. So it's still there, this 30%. So they did not really lose last elections, but it was divided among different parties. So this you could say 30, maybe even 35%. So before Wilders had the largest share of this radical right vote, let's say 20, I think 25%, and the others went then to smaller radical right parties. But now these smaller radical right parties grew, and the voters from that Wilders lost, most of them went to these parties. So yeah, there's been more a transfer of votes within this bloc than that it lost a lot of votes. A little bit maybe to the VVD, the conservative liberals that try to also to gain votes in the radical right sphere. So yeah, but in the end, one could say that there is a quite a stable 30% of the vote that in the Netherlands goes to these parties.
Mhm. Right. You argue that Wilders cannot be understood solely within the populist frame. How has the PVV's ideological trajectory shifted from an anti establishment protest toward a more coherent political project, and what classifications better capture this evolution?
Yeah, so populism has always been, you could say, a thin ideology, yeah? So it needs other ideologies. In the case of the PVV, that always has been a strong nationalism. One could also say nativism, anti-immigration, a anti-Islamic stance, which was based on a whole clash of civilizations kind of ideology, and a conservative law and order viewpoints. So in this trajectory, I since let's say 2010, you could see some tactical changes, but on the whole, the ideology is quite clear and crystallized. You know, it's these pillars, one could say, populism, anti-elite, very strong anti-elite, anti-immigration, welfare state chauvinism, um, anti-Islam, and conservative on law and order. And one should also say quite progressive on some other immaterial issues, such as gay marriage, abortion, euthanasia policy. There, the party is relatively progressive compared to a lot of other parties, but on the rest, it's quite conservative. Anti climate policy. So in a way, it's quite classic, the PVV as a radical right populist party. You know, it's compared to what have we? Rassemblement National, Farage, Alternative für Deutschland, Swedish Democrats. They are in a some of them are together in the European Parliament. So um, the you could say that the characteristics that distinguish the PVV are especially the very strong focus on Islam. That is quite PVV, one could say, and Wilders has been a forerunner in this, a pioneer. Um, Pro-Israel also, and relatively progressive when it comes to immaterial issues such as gay marriage and women's emancipation, abortion. So that are ideologically the main characteristics.
Right. You have written that PVV has become increasingly normalized in Dutch politics. Which institutional mechanisms, parliamentary collaboration, media treatment, coalition signaling, have most contributed to this mainstreaming?
Yeah. Well, media treatment is very important. So in the media, we've seen last, let's say, 10 years, a clear emergence of a very right-wing media. One could even compare it to Fox News kind of media, strong, conservative, very much anti-left. So the left wing has become the main enemy. Left as a word, as a concept, has become almost an insult in the Netherlands. Yeah? So leftist people and things like that. These are not neutral terms. They never were, of course, but it has become stronger. So the media treatment make it, of course, for if the right parties did not deliver in coalitions, the left was no alternative. So then the radical right became an alternative. If the radical right proved not to be the alternative, then one looked to other right wing parties as alternatives, never to the left. The left has been yeah, out of the race, one could almost say, especially in these media. So there, that the radical right has become an alternative has to do with the fact that the in 2023, after 11 years of cordon sanitaire, the VVD decided to open the door again for collaboration with the PVV, with the Wilders party, purely strategically. So they thought we always have to go in on coalitions. We always have to look to left-wing parties. They now wanted to look to a right-wing party. So an extreme right-wing party to have more options. And well, this proved to be a strategic blunder because now for parties, Wilders became an option. And before, they could always say, well, that's a wasted vote because, he will never govern. But now it was not a wasted vote anymore, so it became an option. And for a lot of these voters, even a better option. So, helped by the media, helped by the parliamentary, well, the end of the cordon sanitaire, one could say that PVV could emerge as the winner in 2023.
Mhm. Right. Anti-Islam alarmism remains central to the PVV. Do recent policy expansions toward welfare and housing reflect ideological maturation, tactical vote seeking, or merely cosmetic adjustment that leaves anti-Islam core intact?
Yeah, I think it is anti-Islam core is absolutely the most important core of this party. I say party, but no, the thing is with the PVV, it's really basically one man. Although he has more than 2 million votes, 2.5 million, talking about the PVV is, uh, especially on a national level, is talking about one man and his considerations and his thinking and his decisions, and the rest is, yeah, not really relevant. So one has to look in his head to find out what are, and there is no so there are also no public discussions, no public debates in this part. There's no party organizations. There are conferences. There's no party manifesto or party newspaper or so. It basically is purely a matter of what Wilders wants and what he does and what he likes. And Wilders' absolute core ideology is this anti-Islam ideology. The rest of it is, well, maybe tactical is a little bit too cynical to only call it tactical, but it is not the main issue for him.
Mhm. Right. To what degree has the erosion of pillarized structures and intermediary institutions created the social fragmentation necessary for PVV success? Do cultural anxieties outweigh economic grievances in explaining the party's appeal?
Yeah, well, I think it's mainly a cultural matter. So it's all about immigration. So these voters, their main concern is immigration. Absolutely. Housing is second, but connected to immigration. So economic problems. Well, if you look at the social profile, the social economic profile of the PVV voter, one cannot say that these are the less fortunate ones economically. Of course, you also see them in the lower income classes, but also in the middle income and higher income classes where people do not really have economic anxiety. So economically, the Netherlands is quite doing quite well. So it is mainly a cultural thing, a thing of fear of immigration, fear of especially asylum seekers, which has come as a very big issue in the Netherlands. incidents that have been there with asylum seekers have gained a lot of have attracted a lot of attention in the media, and as a result, these things became yeah, the most salient issues in the election campaign. Immigration was the issue that people talked about, and Wilders benefited from this. So, if you see immigration more as a cultural thing, then I would say it was more on a cultural level than on an economic level.
Mhm. How does the PVV's construction of the Volk differ from earlier Dutch nationalist discourses? Is the imagined community increasingly defined through civilizational frames, especially Judeo Christian identity, rather than ethnic or civic nationalism?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think what is the main difference is that, first of all, until, let's say, the 1960s, 1970s, the Netherlands was a pillarized country. You had these different minorities: the Catholics, the Protestants, the socialists, the liberals. These pillars have disappeared. And in a way, we have now become one big population, without, it's not this idea anymore of these four different populations. There is, one could say, a majority culture, secular, quite progressive in many ways, but also liberal in an economic sense. So that has been a little bit the majority culture. What has become now the new cleavage for a lot of people is between elite, which is uh, often associated with the left, and the people, and that is what Wilders does. So this community, this imagined community of Wilders, is very much a anti-elite community, uh, a little bit anti, uh, especially cultural elites. So as especially against, in the Netherlands we call this the Amsterdam Canal District. That's the center of Amsterdam, and that's where then in this imagined community live the elites that despise the common people. A little bit like in Paris, the Rive Gauche, or well, you have them everywhere, I think. So these left-wing people who despise common people, and that is mainly, I think, has become uh, his imagined community, a good people that are that have been betrayed by a leftist elite. So it's an anti-elitist people. That is the main difference between now and the past.
Mhm. Was the PVV's 2023 electoral breakthrough driven primarily by long-term ideological convergence between party and electorate, or did short-term crises like housing, asylum, pressure, inflation create an episodic opportunity?
Yeah, I think, what happens in the Netherlands is in election campaigns. So we are a country of a lot of parties, very fragmented, and without a real clear big party. So you mostly have like three, four parties that it is almost like a cyclist tour, and in the end you have four who escape the peloton and who then go to the finish, and then the end there will be a sprint, and then 2 or 3% makes the difference. And sometimes one could, in the end, get a small push that can give you these 2-3%. So sometimes it has to do with a little bit of luck and with a little bit sudden events that happen, a good performance at a debate, all these things. So the PVV now, because of what I already said, so the fact that the cordon sanitaire was ended, ended, and the VVD saw that PVV now was an option. Immigration became a hot topic. Wilders kind of profiled himself as being a little bit more moderate. And these three things then, and a few good performances at debates. There was especially one debate that was really watched by a lot of people in the Netherlands, where he yeah, he kind of came out as the winner. And that gave him this last 2, 3, 4% that made him a winner of these elections. Now this did not happen, and now it was the centrist liberal who had this last, yeah, who could say a little bit of luck in the end and a good campaign, and then they could make the sprint in the end and become the biggest party.
The PVV's unique one-member structure creates tactical agility, yet hinders institutionalization.
Yeah.
How does this model shape accountability, policy competence, and the party's ability to govern?
Yeah, well, the main problem for the PVV is absolutely the fact that they lack personnel. They lack good people. And that should not been a problem, except that Wilders is a very, very distrustful man. He does not trust any people outside his very small circle of people. So if he needs ministers, junior ministers, people who he can send for to do a job, then he has to rely on this small circle of people that are around him for, well, let's say 15 years already, 10, 15 years. And these are people without any experience in governing. Their only experience is, you know, helping Wilders in his opposition. So they are not people who can govern a whole ministry, you know. So this is the main problem, and he does not want to recruit people from outside because he does not trust these people, and also he's afraid that other people can become more popular than he is, and all these kinds of things. So that's really the main problem of the PVV, and that's why basically he failed in government because he lacks people, he lacks quality in his party.
Right. Compared with LPF and FVD, the PVV has exhibited remarkable longevity. Does this durability reflect ideological clarity, organizational discipline, even if minimal, or simply an absence of credible far right competition?
Yeah. And when I read the question, I thought about, well, there's even a fourth option, I would say, that's luck. They were a few times they were just lucky. So for instance, the FVD seemed to be a real good competitor, but then there was Corona, the coronavirus suddenly, and at the moment that the FVD made his breakthrough and was really campaigning in the whole country, suddenly Corona broke out. Everybody had to go in lockdown. For Wilders, this was nothing new because he's basically in lockdown the last 20 years, being in this strong security measures. But for Baudet, for Forum for Democracy, this proved to be a real disaster because Baudet all got mingled up in all kinds of conspiracy theories about the corona and about the vaccination, about so there he was just lucky, Wilders, that Baudet made him, and there were arguments in the party because of this. So Baudet made himself, impossible. Having said that, so the longevity of the FVD, it's not over for the party. They won again with a new leader, a young female leader, 28 years old. They became more attractive again for some voters. So, but for Wilders, on the other hand, what is also matters in Wilders, he's a political professional. He knows how to play the game. He's very experienced in debates, in how to attract media attention, not too much and also not too little. You know, he exactly knows how to do these things. So it's also skill, I would say, that plays a role here.
Mhm. The collapse of the most recent governing arrangement highlighted constitutional constraints on
Yeah.
Wheeler's maximalist proposals. Has the forced freezing of radical positions substantively moderated the movement or merely deferred ideological confrontation?
Yeah, I think the last. I think since they are out of the government, he's kind of back in his old anti-Islam routine. He kind of moderated his viewpoints for a while. He always said, I put them in the refrigerator for a while, in the freezer, but now the refrigerator is open again and all the old viewpoints are back again. One could even say that he, in a way, he contaminated the conservative liberals and the Farmers' Party, the other uh, his partners in the coalition. He contaminated them with his ideology because they are also became more anti-Islam, very much pro-Israel. So yeah, there's also here there's not a clear answer maybe.
Okay. You note that Wilders seems most effective in opposition. If the PVV returns to government, might governance responsibilities erode its anti-system identity, or does the Schrodinger's populism phenomenon enable Wilders to frame himself as both insider and outsider simultaneously?
Yeah, I didn't know the Schrodinger's paradox, so I had to look it up. Yeah, Wilders is an insider since the very beginning. So he is in politics since 1990. First, as he worked for the Conservative Liberal Parliamentary Group just as an assistant. Then he became a member of the parliamentary group, 1998. Then he started his own party in 2004. So he's been always there. He's been always there. He's an insider, you know, as much as you can be an insider in politics in The Hague, in the Netherlands. So he's the longest, he has the longest tenure of all parliamentarians in the Netherlands. Absolutely. So in that sense, but he managed he always managed to give himself an outsider profile by, you know, provoking, by making these harsh statements. So in that sense, yeah, he can really play with these elements. And I don't know the exact article of this Schrödinger populism. So um I'm afraid to go more to go deep into this, but at first glance, I would say yes, he plays this insider outsider role very good.
All right. PVV foreign policy is heavily filtered through a clash of civilizations narrative. How does this framing shape its positions on Israel Palestine, NATO, Russia, and Ukraine? And does it distort pragmatic assessment of national interests?
Yeah, well, he is very much so pro-Israel, pro-Netanyahu. He doesn't allow any criticism on Israel, and I think, you know, all the many victims there. Yeah, well, that's part of a war, and so in that sense, uh, he's very much pro Netanyahu. Um, and yeah, he sees Israel there. He has been as a boy, 19 years old, when he left school, he gone to work in a kibbutz. He's not Jewish himself, but he went there to, you know, in a gap year. Huh? Before starting his studies, he wanted to do something else, so he did this. And since then, this was 1980, 1981. Since then, he has this special connection with Israel. And one could even say that this special connection with Israel, then he kind of saw already in the 1990s, he really saw the enemies of Israel, especially as Islamic enemies. So there also his whole anti-Islamic discourse kind of comes from this pro-Israel stance. And he still sees this Israel as the main um, buffer against Islamization, and this whole story is still there very much. So, when with regard to Ukraine and Russia, the story is more, well, it's a more difficult issue for him. For so around 2017, 2018, for a while he kind of made some remarks that were more pro-Russia. He even went to Moscow, but never as much as Front National or Salvini or or Orban. So and then when Russia invaded Ukraine, he really distanced himself from Russia, but at the same time, he was not a very enthusiastic supporter of Zelensky and of Ukraine also. So he tries to, yeah, get a little bit distance there. Um, so the same with NATO. So yeah, on the one hand, he's very pro-Trump. On the other hand, well, Trump demands the 5% expenditure on defense, and yeah, that's also something that for Wilders is problematic. That's quite a lot in his opinion, 5%. So so in foreign policy and with this, it does it sometimes hurt national interest. Yes, sometimes it does. So in trade with Arabic countries, with Islamic countries, Wilders can really be a problem for the Netherlands. With all his remarks, with all his, and for him, it's not a reason to say, okay, I will lower down my voice a little bit. No, he just says, no, we should not deliver any weapons to Islamic countries, for example, and things like that. So yeah, he's quite principled on these matters.
Yes. You have argued that PVV positions Israel as the civilizational vanguard of the West.
Yeah.
Is this symbolic architecture primarily a theological civilizational justification for its anti Islam platform, or does it carry genuine programmatic implications for Dutch foreign policy?
Yeah, well, it did. Last government, what's still there now as a caretaker government, was also quite pro-Israel, one of the most pro-Israel governments, I would say, in the European Union for a long time. So there was not much criticism on Netanyahu for a long time. They were very much against sanctions. So, for example, when there was question of some sick children going to the Netherlands for treatment. So the PVV was very much against it, and also this government was against it. So in that sense, yeah, no, it really had programmatic implications, absolutely. So but it also, yeah, does it have theological? Yeah, that's difficult to say. It is this whole idea of Israel first as the there are different reasons for supporting Israel. There is this historical feeling of guilt towards Jewish population in the Netherlands. The Netherlands was one of the countries where one of the highest percentage of Jewish being deported from the Netherlands. So there's this feeling of guilt. There is a idea of Israel as the vanguard against Islamication and part of this clash of civilizations and that whole story. There's a specific Christian motive in supporting Israel. You see this among Orthodox Christians. There's a whole Christian theory behind that. You see it also in the United States. So these are three main reasons to support Israel in the Netherlands, and yeah, you see this in the programmatic policy towards Israel.
And thank you. And lastly, Professor Vossen, the PVV has oscillated between advocating an exit and merely proposing a referendum.
Yeah.
This reflects strategic ambiguity intended to broaden its electorate, internal ideological uncertainty, or recognition that Euroscepticism is increasingly cultural rather than institutional.
Yeah, well, I think here you can really see a tactical motive. So Nexit is not really popular in the Netherlands. So it has never been in one poll has come even close to a majority. So at most 25% of the Dutch electorate favors some kind of Nexit. So Nexit, because it's a trading country, the Netherlands. So that would be economically very stupid to to have a Nexit. We are completely dependent on Germany economically. So, and then people saw, of course, what happened in the UK with Brexit. So there Wilders thought, okay, maybe with Nexit, I will never win this battle. I will, like Le Pen did in France, say, okay, I drop the whole Nexit idea. He said something about a referendum. But in his last program of the European parliamentary elections, he was quite vague and moderate about the European Union. He's not a fan. He will never be a fan of the European Union. But Nexit, yeah, is also a bridge too far for him.
Professor Koen Vossen, thank you so much for your
Yes.
time.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Well, thank you.